Ladies and gents, I'm Rex, and this is Vlad the Impaler, Blood Oaths, Extra Part 2 by the channel Extra Credits. Yeah, we saw the first part. This is the latest series from this channel. I guess they just finished it, so I'm like, why the hell not? We watched the first one yesterday. Vlad the Impaler is, really, great story around him, basically. Because obviously the Dracula, the novel basically was inspired by him, right? So also the story of the TV outbreak of New England, and the main core of it is from the Vlad the Impaler as Dracula. The point is that he created this kind of a psychological image, right, to make sure the people fear him, about him being this kind of a supernatural type of entity, right? Who apparently drinks blood, impales all of his enemy, and is just pure out, effed up guy, basically, who will kill you 10 different ways, that kind of thing. So he created this aura around him that basically made sure that, he saved his empire somewhat from this major powers as Hungary, Ottoman Empire, things like that. Because his father and before all the, his ancestor basically was having hard time defending, because Transylvania, it's a really small place, compared to this two, Hungarian Empire and Ottoman Empire. So what Vlad the Impaler did was really badass. So let's watch this one.
Ottoman Empire, 1447. This is how Romanian folklore says it happened. When Vlad Dracul was being run down in a marsh, when he knew that he'd be caught and killed by the pretender Vladislav, he gave his sword and pendant to a loyal boyar. "Take them to my son." For 5 days, the boyar rode, evading enemies and crossing rivers, until he entered the Ottoman Empire and presented them to Vlad Dracula. And as the boyar recounted the deaths of his father and brother, Dracula stood staring at the sword and pendant, both given to his father by Sigismund, both marked with the iconography of the Order of the Dragon. And there, the 17-year-old Vlad Dracula swore that he would not rest until he had avenged his murdered kin.
Did you just say 17-year-old? That beard is basically overkill, isn't it?
That he would personally, with his own hand, slay the pretender Vladislav.
17-year-old with that kind of beard, alright.
While the story we started with may be folklore, it does capture a solid truth. When John Hunyadi's invasion killed Vlad's father and brother, it put the teenage hostage into play. Murad seems to have told Vlad of the deaths himself, and then followed it up by making him an officer in the Ottoman military. Because despite the greater popularity of his younger brother Radu, Vlad's seriousness and determination had convinced Sultan Murad that this was the prince they wanted ruling Wallachia as an ally. And considering how brutally Hunyadi and his allies had killed Vlad's family.
And not to mention that basically he always saw him, lingering in the dark while bats were, basically flying around him, and him basically decapitating all the cat's head and eating them. So they're like, yeah, this guy's basically gonna kick that ass.
Murad also assumed that any chance of the young prince defecting to the Hungarians was most likely buried alive with Vlad's older brother. Plus, it was the perfect time to reclaim Wallachia for the Dracul dynasty. For when John Hunyadi and Vladislav marched into Ottoman-held Serbia, Murad had dealt them a shattering defeat outside Kosovo. In fact, the rout was so chaotic that no one even knew if Hunyadi or Vladislav had survived.
Damn.
Seeing his chance, Vlad stormed into Wallachia with a Turkish...
This just shows that around that time how brutal and powerful Ottoman Empire was, right? By the end, it slowly declined really badly, that it was just... everybody was just picking on them, basically. That's what led them, getting entirely destroyed in World War I. But still, around its peak, Ottoman Empire was really feared.
Cavalry force and seized the throne. A dramatic beginning to a powerful and bloody reign.
Well, that's
Soon,
it?
Vlad would take revenge on the boyars who had betrayed his father and brother, and would carve a swath across all of the land of...
Damn.
Wait, no. Oops. Sorry. Funny story. Vladislav actually turned up, both very alive and with an army, recaptured the throne, and sent Vlad back into exile. His first reign lasted all of 2 months. At first, he fled back to the Ottomans, but things weren't safe there either.
I'm not gonna lie, it would have been so badass if that was true, right? He just walked there, take over the throne and kept it, basically kill everybody who opposed him and his father, and that's where the reign started. That would have been started at such a high note that no wonder people basically feared him, but no, that's not true. It just lasted 2 months until the guy came back.
Vladislav, though he'd accepted Hunyadi's help to be installed on the throne of Wallachia under the explicit agreement that he'd fight the Turks, was discovering the same thing Vlad's father had. Wallachia simply couldn't survive against the Ottomans without Hungarian aid, and Hungary was a mess. Soon Wallachian boyars pressured him to make peace with the Sultan. So he sent envoys to Sultan Murad looking to strike a deal. And Vlad, rightfully worried his death might be a condition of the bargain, fled to Moldavia. And Vlad received a warm welcome there. For that year, his uncle had become the ruler of Moldavia, and his cousin Stephen the heir apparent. And the 3 years that Vlad spent there, connecting with his cousin and
Hold up there. Wait a minute, I have to hear that again.
received a warm welcome there. For that year, his uncle had become the ruler of Moldavia, and his cousin Stephen the heir apparent.
Okay, so they recently became there, right? Because if they were, ruler before then only thing I could think of, why didn't the, Vlad the Impaler's father, right, dragon, didn't seek his help and create some kind of alliance between the Moldavia and Wallachia? But I guess he recently became king. By then it was already too late for the, Vlad the Impaler's father. I guess this is the perfect opportunity to, basically create this kind of strong alliance, right? Use your uncle, right? Use Moldavia and I guess take over Wallachia and create this kind of a joint alliance between Moldavia and Wallachia, because it's basically both are, relatives, so why not? And now you're not a smaller country. Two together, you can put up somewhat of a fight against Hungary and Ottoman Empire. Maybe Hungary, not Ottoman Empire, but still.
And the 3 years that Vlad spent there, connecting with his cousin and getting a Renaissance education, were likely some of the happiest of his life. He even got a taste of military glory, helping his uncle and cousin turn back a Polish force. Good days. Though the time was abruptly cut short when his uncle's half-brother assassinated him, and Vlad and Stephen both fled to Hungary, where he was forced to play cat and mouse with John Hunyadi, going from town to town, hiding with sympathetic boyars, and at one point slipping away just as a squad of ambushers tried to catch and assassinate him. Then everything changed again. First, Sultan Murad died, and in his place rose his more vigorous and ambitious son Mehmed, who declared it his top priority to finally conquer Constantinople. A goal made possible since while the city was still a trade center and symbolically important, it had declined in military power. Hunyadi's star was falling as well. While he was still revered as the most famous crusader against the Turks, his 2 recent defeats had tarnished his reputation. I mean, a few years before, he'd essentially ruled Hungary on behalf of a child king, but now he was back to just being a plain old prince of Transylvania. And then Vladislav was aligning ever closer with the Ottomans.
Wait a minute, he's the Prince of Transylvania? So I guess Wallachia is not Transylvania? I'm getting confused there.
Meaning Hunyadi was suddenly shopping for a new Prince of Wallachia, which set up an interesting space for an approach between Hunyadi and Vlad, because each did have something the other wanted. Hunyadi could give Vlad legitimacy, official recognition in Hungary, and a path to reclaim his throne. And in turn, Vlad could give Hunyadi an able partner who knew.
Yeah, but he killed his father and his brother, right? He tried to kill him as well. He chased him.
The Ottoman military and leadership from the inside, and who could replace Vladislav if necessary. Striking this deal, however, meant that Vlad would need to join the man who'd slaughtered his family.
Yeah.
But in an ironic twist, Vlad's father of all people had prepared him for this decision, back when he'd abandoned Vlad as a hostage with the Ottomans. Politics was impersonal, and if reclaiming his throne meant foregoing vengeance, then so be it.
Yeah, that's a pretty strong, strong type of thinking, right? A pretty smart thinking, because you can't survive with that kind of personal mentality, like, oh, he killed my family and, tried to kill me, I have to oppose him. No, right now let's play the hand that you have, basically. Right now let's ally with him if that gets me the throne that I want, and then later on I can kill him. Politics is really important when you're ruling things. Lots of people don't like politics, but one thing's for damn sure, throughout the years, politics has been really important part of ruling, basically. Without that, your rule is pretty cut short.
Vlad became a noble at Hunyadi's court, and his new patron took him to the coronation of the new Hungarian king, Ladislaus the Posthumous, where he took an oath, formally, to act as an ally of Hungary and the Catholic Church. His role would be the same as his father's, halting the Ottomans' advance and reclaiming Christian lands. And with his oath sworn, the Hungarian Diet charged Vlad with defending the Transylvanian frontier against the Ottomans and their Wallachian allies, a duty his father also held. News of Constantinople's fall in 1453, while no surprise, did sour the celebrations. Stories had filtered in.
No surprise. This is the first time anybody sieged it, right? Yeah, it is the first time. This is the first time Ottoman sieged it, and first time anybody sieged it since it was made by Romans.
that the Ottomans had impaled prisoners in front of the city walls, a punishment used by both Ottomans and German Saxons as a way to scare the garrison into surrendering. Believing the city would fall, and wanting to preserve his strength for defending his own territory, Hunyadi opted against sending troops to Constantinople. But he knew that Mehmed would not stop with the bastion of Eastern Christendom, and the next place on the chopping block would be the Hungarian frontier city of Belgrade. So in 1456, he whipped up an army of mercenaries and marched to relieve the city, leaving Vlad to defend the pass into Transylvania and keep Vladislav tied down. Hunyadi's forces reached Belgrade just as the besieged city was ready to fall, broke through the Turkish lines, and managed to get inside the citadel to reinforce the beleaguered garrison. They broke the siege, repelling Mehmed's forces after weeks of combat. Hunyadi, the White Knight who had fought the Ottomans for decades, had relieved Belgrade, an event described as a miracle. But a miracle that went sour, as plague swept into his camp, killing Hunyadi and the expedition's other leader. But Vlad Dracula had little time to mourn the enemy-turned-mentor, for his goal had been to tie up Vladislav's forces, and he knew the best way to...
Yeah, I think you would mourn the, threatening alliance, basically, that he's dead. Maybe his alliance to Hungary might be, threatened now. He's definitely not going to cry. Okay, maybe he would cry, because he's not the one who killed him, I guess.
Do it. Invasion. As he crossed into his homeland, he looked up to see a fell star burning in the heavens. Halley's Comet, a celestial body that people across the world interpreted as either a sign of impending catastrophe.
Oh, come on, this is accurate history? He saw the Halley's Comet? Holy shit.
Or great events. And meeting his enemy's army outside the Wallachian capital of Targovishta, Vlad took the burning star as a sign of coming victory. We know little about what happened next. According to one story, the relatively small armies clashed, but in another, the forces decided to settle the issue by single combat. Vlad Dracula, son of the dragon, against his cousin Vladislav, Prince of Wallachia. Though in both versions, Vlad slays the pretender with his own hand. When he took the throne, his coins were stamped with the five-tailed comet, the symbol of his victory. But that victory would be difficult to hold on to, because while he agreed to pay Mehmed 2,000 gold as tribute, and agreed to let the Ottoman armies cross his lands, these agreements were only to buy time for him to build and repair more fortresses and solve internal problems at home. For the faction of boyars who had brought him to the throne were a small minority of the nobility. Most had supported the slain Vladislav, including those who had risen up and killed Vlad's brother at the prompting of John Hunyadi. Indeed, it was only months into his second reign when a young boyar raised an army of mercenaries to dethrone the young prince. But Vlad ambushed the little band as they marched toward Targovishta, and made an example of them no one would miss. His troops sharpened long stakes.
Yeah, they didn't know who they're dealing with, right? They didn't know who the Vlad was. He was the Vlad the Impaler. They're like, you're the first victim of the title Vlad the Impaler.
Greased them, and then shoved them into the bodies of the noble and all his male kin. Then he left them, still living, beside the road to die over the coming days.
Oh yeah, he's left them alive right after doing that shit. They slowly bled out. Oh my god, I forgot about that part. Damn, this guy was brutal.
He would refine this gruesome method of execution until history remembered him chiefly for the brutal spectacle. Vlad the Impaler had arrived, and his enemies would suffer. That's right, Zoe. Ahmed.
Yeah, see, the guy basically just knew that only way he can keep his empire is by showing some kind of a strength that no big empire would basically can challenge. It's just strength of being crazy, right? Holy shit, this guy is crazy. He's just impaling people left and right. If you just step into Wallachia, you would see all the impaling bodies all around. Basically, he drinks the blood of people. He sits in his throne while there is no light around. He sits in the darkness or something. All this mystical, supernatural thing that basically he created as a psychological warfare. It basically worked. Otherwise, his empire wouldn't have lasted, just like his father. He would just run around left and right trying to survive, but, not doing so successfully. Damn, the guy was political, right? The guy knew the psychological warfare is really important. No wonder he was, known throughout the history. Even today, people instinctively know who the Vlad the Impaler is. I mean, obviously, Dracula feed into that, right? I mean, anytime an artist basically pitches in history, right, creates a poem, a song, or a fucking book, that entity becomes so famous. Historical figures become so famous if artists pitches in and creates something. That's why everybody remembers Paul Revere, right? A guy basically who told everybody British is coming. No war throughout the history. Anybody knows the name of the guy who told people enemy is coming. But everybody remembers Paul Revere because there's a poem about him. So artist pitches in, and the guy becomes usually a lot more famous. Obviously, that feed into it. But Vlad the Impaler is pretty famous because how he was, right? Nobody throughout the history found somebody like him who created this mystique, supernatural mystique around him, and this brutalness of him. Robbie, that was Vlad the Impaler, Blood Oath, Extra Strip Part 2 by the channel Extra Credits. If you like my reaction, don't forget to like, subscribe. Check out the Rick Sandy, there's a link in the description. Check out the cast for plays, check out the end cards, and yeah, I'll see you next time.